What up, YouTube? Kendall Vanderbilt coming at you back at the Fantasy Football Tavern. Thanks for being with us. And we're joined today by a great friend of mine, amazing competitor out in the Dynasty streets, auction specialist, Mr. Phil Ruskin. Phil, how we doing, brother?
Doing great, man. Appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to what we're going to dive into here tonight.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Appreciate popping on. One of my favorite people. Definitely one of my favorite people to collaborate with. Phil, for the people that maybe have seen me once or twice but don't know you, what you got going on in the fantasy football world?
Yeah, so I host a show called The Extra Point. You can find me on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Really, what we're doing with The Extra Point is talking about Dynasty, all things Dynasty, but startups, trade values, what the projections and range of outcomes could be from everybody from rookies all the way to, your vets. Ultimately, what we're trying to find is just the little differences that help us win a championship, man. Same thing everyone's trying to do, bring home that ring.
Love it. Congrats on show number 1. It was super good. For those that don't know, man, Phil, he's got a silky smooth voice, man. He's definitely got that podcast vibe. I like checking him out, and I will definitely be. Hopefully, I'll be maybe on the show one of
Well,
these
yeah,
days.
for
That
sure.
would be.
We're gonna get you on here for sure, 100%, brother.
I love it, man. So today we are gonna do we're gonna start a new series. This is based off of Startup Dynasty Superflex ADP. This comes to us from my great friends over at Dynasty League Football. Not sponsors. I'm just a fan. In fact, I give them money. I pay them. I think it's like $5 or $6 a month. But if you want to make that free, I'm all about it. But anyways, this is coming courtesy of them and their website. They have a month by month ADP. So if this looks a little bit odd, if you've been doing a lot of mocks recently, this is just from the month of May, the entire month, and I'm sure the sample size isn't like ridiculous. So we all know there's going to be a few picks that are maybe like a little bit stale or old, but you think you get the general idea. What we're going to do is we're going to do 3 rounds at a time. Today we're going to cover rounds 1 through 3, and we're just going to go through our favorite and least favorite pick when it comes to the value and how it falls on the board. So we might have particular takes on players, but this is really a value exercise of who is mispriced at this point, and why, maybe who would we take over them, that type of a thing. And then we'll just do 3 rounds at a time until we get through most of this. And then as we get into the following months, depending on when you do your draft, maybe we'll go over some changes month to month, see some risers and fallers, and do more of that style of content. So starting off, round 1, probably not the most interesting round to talk about, just because ADP is way more concrete in round 1, and it's hard to say if something's a crazy mistake versus, with later rounds you can get pretty opinionated. But nonetheless, there are still some differences in our rankings too. Phil, who do you have as your round 1? Who's your favorite value?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at round 1 and you just kind of mentioned it, right? Like, there's no bad picks. You know what I mean? Like, you're not drafting a guy that should be going in round 6 or 7 in round 1. So I don't think that you're going to really have, again, outside of injury, really any misses in this round. But again, looking at this ADP and kind of taking a look at the board here, to me, CeeDee Lamb at the 111 is the standout. Look, he was the wide receiver 1 last season. He also led the league in targets. He didn't add any competition from the receiver's perspective this year in Dallas. Regardless of what happens with Dak's contract, he's back this season. And there's no running backs, so I don't see a world where CD doesn't repeat as a top 5 guy as a floor. And I think he absolutely has a chance to repeat as the overall wide receiver 1 again. Now, statistically and historically, we know that is very difficult and probably unlikely. But again, when you look at somebody who's almost going at the turn, I just don't see how. I personally have Lamb as the number 1 wide receiver in my dynasty startup rankings. I don't see how I wouldn't be pressing the button if I was the 111 and he was on the clock, or excuse me, on the board. I don't know how I wouldn't just smash the button as fast as possible and start preparing for my second round pick.
I love it. Yeah, I guess now that I look at him, it's worth noting that when you look at the wide receiver 2s to that big group at the top, Lamb kind of stands out to me as like, who's going to get in his way from dominating? No offense, Cooks, but Cooks is not Addison. Cooks is not T. Higgins. Yeah, that's interesting. So I agree. CeeDee Lamb's awesome. But you know what I'm gonna say. If anyone's drafting, you
Yeah,
know
here
how
we
high I'm
go.
gonna reach here. Yeah, I am. I'm gonna have to get like some music for this once I learn production quality. But it's gonna be Anthony Richardson for me, coming off the board based on ADP at 108. My hot take coming into this year is that Anthony Richardson will absolutely get MVP votes for overall league MVP. And when it comes to Dynasty, when we look at startup values next year, I think Richardson is going to take a leap into the minimum top 5. I think he goes at least as the 105. I think there's a very good shot he could basically be the next Jalen Hurts, move up to like the 104, 105 range in startups. So I'm smashing Richardson every time I've been in drafts where I'm at the 106 plus. I'm very comfortable smashing the button. That's why I've kind of liked drafting at the tail end of the first round. Maybe not all the way to the tail end, but like the 107 through 109, 110, that range, I feel like I usually can get Richardson. I'm pretty happy to. So he's my guy. I like the offense. I don't just believe in the rushing upside. I believe that the offensive ecosystem as a whole is going to lead to a really safe floor with explosive weeks, with really secretly a very, very good wide receiver core. And I think good coaching who believes in him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with anything, of course, and I think what people are doing right now, especially if you're seeing, mock drafts, if you're in mock drafts or if you're in real drafts, startups, in a super flex, you're going to have probably Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. I've seen a lot of CJ Stroud and Patrick Mahomes go as the first 4 quarterbacks. And then you're seeing the run on wide receivers. So I think there is a real, to your point, like drafting in that kind of mid, not really on the turn in the first, but kind of that mid first round. I think you've got a really good shot to get Richardson at the 107 to the 110 range. And I think you're right to again, small sample size, but to see in those, 12 quarters, he put up as many QB1 finishes as Patrick Mahomes and CJ Stroud did last year. So to me, that says like, look, this is a guy, again, limited sample size, but when we did see it, he has a chance to break fantasy. And ultimately in round 1, that's what you're looking for, is who can finish as the overall positional number 1 at their respective, quarterback or wide receiver.
I certainly hope so. I would hate for this channel to get started with my hottest take being a bust. That's going to be tough to recover from. Or I'll win a lot of people a lot of money. I hope.
Yeah.
I sincerely hope that's the outcome. You guys know that's what I'm about here. Let's move into to the worst of round 1. Phil, who do you think is? We talked about it. There's no crazy bad value, but who do you think is the most mispriced?
Yeah, and again, this is kind of going off of the ADP as it stands today. We know it's, June, it's really early, but I just don't see Joe Burrow being, the 106 ahead of Justin Jefferson, ahead of Richardson, ahead of Chase and Lamb. Look, I love Joe Burrow. I have him on some of my rosters, and I think he's going to be great. Obviously, had an injury last year that cost him the majority of the season. He was hurt coming into the year, and then of course finished the year on IR. I just, for me, because we're doing an ADP exercise, Joe Burrow is mispriced at the 106, even in Superflex. I'd be much more comfortable taking him in the middle of the second round as my QB1, especially if I start with one of the top tier wide receivers in the first round. So to me, again, no bad picks. Certainly have nothing bad to say about Joe Burrow. Expecting him and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, hopefully with good health, to have a great season and potentially be a really fun team that has a real shot at the playoffs. But if I'm in a startup draft and this is how the board falls, Joe Burrow at the 106 raises an eyebrow for me as to why somebody would make that decision over some of these top tier wide receivers.
Yeah, agreed. Or at least I think the Burrow Richardson is like an easy flip at a minimum.
Yeah.
And then honestly, you can even start looking at like, well, Kyler's not as good, but there's a kind of a theme with those top quarterbacks, right? The, ability to be super, super elite. Haven't seen it from Joe for a while. Hope he proves us wrong, because I know me and you are pretty big on Jamar Chase. We like that team. But I got to see it a little bit more. And I mean, it's the Bengals. Also, there's something in me tells me the Bengals aren't going to be this new version of the Bengals forever. They have a history of not being awesome. So we'll see if the front office keeps it going for a while. But yeah, I agree. Burrow maybe a little bit mispriced in my opinion too. My worst, maybe most mispriced quarterback. This is just for me. I just think from this year to next year, one of the big fallers I'm gonna see is I think Lamar Jackson is going a little bit too early. Maybe a little bit spicy since I think he's a great pick, but again, I'm high on Anthony Richardson. My problem with Lamar is I think he's fantastic for redraft. I think he's getting to a point in Dynasty where as soon as he starts running a little bit less and being a little less efficient, I've never loved him as a passer. He's just so lethal that he can break fantasy. but we know that for his real life NFL team, he's definitely struggled at times, and that struggle has been the reason they don't move on in the playoffs. And I think it's due to him just not being an elite passer. I won't say he's a bad passer, but I can't say he's the top end of good. And so because of that, if the team has a ridiculous defense and they added Derrick Henry, I think the Baltimore Ravens floor for Lamar Jackson on a per game basis is lower than it's ever been. If you get to halftime and Henry's already rushed in two, the defense is doing its thing, they're up by 2+ touchdowns, I think we can have a really quiet second half where they just run the ball a bunch. And I just don't see the need for them to risk Lamar in a lot of ways. I also really just don't like taking offensive weapons in a team that might not ever need offense. Right? I've been a
Yeah.
Bears fan for a while. You know that half the time our defense scored more than our offense. It wasn't a good time to
You may
have
not want to
offensive
admit that out
weapons.
loud.
Yeah. I mean, you see in the background, it is what it is. So I'm not anti-Lamar. I just think he's a little bit overpriced for his like 3-year window in Dynasty. And I think he has a surprisingly, shockingly low floor this year with the addition of Henry and them having an elite defense. Who's your worst?
We went with
We
Burrow.
already talked about that. We already talked about Joe Burrow.
We're moving around too, my man.
We're moving a little bit.
We're moving. We're moving. The train's rolling down the tracks here.
I'll be asking you all sorts of personal questions live on air if we have a few more. This is the tavern after all right? Moving on. Round 2. Let's get this thing moving. Who's your favorite value in round 2?
To me, it's Bijan Robinson. And look, I think when you look at the running back landscape, you cannot say a negative thing about Christian McCaffrey and his usage. The only caveat to that might be his age. Sure, he is getting a little bit older. He's 27 years old. But look, Christian McCaffrey's a cheat code. You saw the report, the interview come out this week about Bijan saying he is going to be featured in the Falcons offense like how they use Christian McCaffrey. And I don't think there's a single person that watched a Falcons game last year that didn't want to just walk up to Arthur Smith and go, "What are you doing? Like, do you not see the talent on your team?" Like, I mean, the amount of times that I have, hashtag free Bijan is unbelievable at this point. Look, the guy can break fantasy. We expect him with the youth, with the usage, to be someone that could finish as the overall RB1. I don't have any problem with somebody that wants to take a strong Brees or Christian McCaffrey stance. The reason Bijan stands out to me is if you're telling me at the 207 I could get as the RB3, who I believe is the RB1 in the middle of the second round, that's fantastic. So there's just no downside to that usage. I think people might have some fears about Tyler Algier being a part of the offense. That was Arthur Smith's coaching staff. I don't see that being, number one, I don't see that being the way that Raheem Morris is going to run the team. Number two, I like Tyler Algier. He's a good player. He's not Bijan. You know what I mean? Like, he's not someone that's going to demand more carries or more work in this offense. So to me, Bijan at the 207 is my favorite pick and certainly a value as the RB3 coming off of the board in a dynasty startup.
How close is Bijan to Brees for you? I mean, is it just a straight up coin flip? I mean, is it like an actual like tiebreaker? If it is a tiebreaker, what is it? Or if it's more of a separation, what kind of does it for you? Because they're going back to back, right?
They go back to back.
Him.
Yeah. So I'll tell you my rankings. I have it Bijan, Brees, McCaffrey, Gibbs. That's how I have my personal rankings. And the Gibbs McCaffrey is a coin flip. The reason I have McCaffrey ahead of Gibbs is because of Montgomery. And I know there's going to be an uptick in work for Gibbs, and what we saw last year is great, and especially how he ended the season and in the playoffs. But CMC's competition is not Montgomery, right? So to me, the reason, to answer your question directly, the Bijan pick ahead of Brees, both are young, both are featured backs, both don't have great competition. I think Atlanta should, on paper, be the better offense. I think they should score more points. And to be honest with you, I think if Kirk Cousins is healthy with Kyle Pitts, with Drake London, Bijan, to me, I there are some pieces in New York that I like, but I'm not a Mike Williams truther. You know what I mean? And so I think at the end of the day, you're really talking about, Garrett Wilson with an older Aaron Rodgers and Breece Hall. I just feel like Bijan's going to have a better season with a bigger ceiling. And ultimately, I think that's what I'm looking for, is somebody who's going to hold and retain their value. We're splitting hairs. That's really what we're doing here. We're splitting hairs. Both are going to retain value. Both are not guys that you would really want to trade away. They are foundational pieces for your roster. So to me, it's kind of a, little bit of metrics that say, I think Atlanta might be slightly better than the Jets, and I project them to be better than the Jets for the next 2 to 3 years. So that's what solidifies Bijan as number one for me.
You're not going to hear any arguments from me. I tend to like people that have never torn an ACL versus those that have, and I will always take someone who doesn't have to play in MetLife every day versus versus
turf.
the antithesis there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you want a tiebreaker, just don't play at MetLife. Pun intended. Sorry, Brees. My bad, bud. But yeah, and also I think this is kind of underestimated, but like New York Jets have a pretty elite defense. I think there's sometimes the game is over. I owned Brees, and there were in the playoffs. I was very scared there were going to be some fourth quarters where he's just not even on the field. The game is so over. There is no fourth quarter situation. I feel like the Falcons are in a situation where Bijan could have 10 fantasy points, but in the 2-minute drill, he can do what's, Ramondre had a history of doing this. His kind of breakout year was he'd be having a decent game, and then in the fourth quarter, in a drive, he will catch 4 passes for 30 yards. And all of a sudden, where this 7 fantasy points took a 10-point game into like top 10 RB on the week. And I think Bijan has the opportunity to do that, where Brees will probably already have caught 8 passes by that time it happens, but there's going to be some games where it doesn't happen that way. So yeah, I'm with you on the Bijan over Brees. Not a bad pick either way, though. Let's see. That was your favorite there. My favorite, honestly, I'll put it this way. I think when ADP changes, he's not going in the second anymore. He's going to go in the first. I just don't know where. I think he's going to be he won't go higher than I think the 110, 111. He's not climbing that high, but it's going to be Caleb Williams for my beloved Chicago Bears. It's just a value because I think he really should go probably 2 picks earlier. And I think long-term, it's going to be a pretty nice pick. Do I see him being up there with CJ Stroud sooner rather than later? Yes, I do. And this is somebody who doesn't draft Bears players because I've been there. I know how this goes, and I don't fall into that trap very often.
Yeah.
But Caleb's is a different story, right? Simply put, obviously a generational prospect that is coming into an offense that I don't think any rookie has ever come into. I'm almost at the point where I have to consider an argument for like, is having all those weapons going to be bad for his like growing up a rich kid? Like, is the silver spoon the fact that he has more weapons than quarterbacks who have been like, I have played 20 years in the NFL and I've never seen a wide receiver core that good, right?
Yeah.
Like, that I honestly have to think of an argument like against how good that is, because it's so overtly over the top in how great that is. And you know me, I'm a Rome guy too. I'm fully that like Rome and Neighbors are a coin flip versus like a tier break. So I think Caleb is going to be just fantastic. I think we've got some coaching issues in Chicago, and overall, like the coaching offensive coordinator that has shut down a number of quarterback careers in their infancy, which is the scariest part of that for me. But I think talent is going to win out in the end. I think he has receivers that win by getting open, right? We have DJ Moore, who I did a deep dive to figure out his value, and he gets open because he's open. He's actually really ridiculously wide open. He wasn't force-fed bad targets. When you actually look at his catch rate, his catch percentage, I looked and it was definitely within the top 12 among like qualified wide receivers. Khalil Shakir like never dropped a pass, but we're not going to count him in that company. Okay. When it came to like, when I look at like top assets, he was definitely in the top tier of catch rate. So when you've got targets that they get open, which is going to help you. You've got a ridiculous route runner who has never not been open his entire life in Keenan Allen. And then you've got the guy who can pretty much win any 50-50 ball in Rome. Great pass catching back. He's got 3 running backs that are all fairly talented. So I think there's a million ways to go, a lot of ways to score. And I would project him to break most of Chicago's passing records.
Yeah,
so a little mispriced. Not mispriced by a munch. There's some other guys in this range that I like, but if I have a chance to talk Caleb Williams up a little bit more, I'm going to. So nice. Who's your worst?
Yeah, to me, it is kind of a coin flip here between Trevor Lawrence and Jaden Daniels. I'll start with the obvious. I would take Dak Prescott ahead of both of those players. So to me, that's just the reason they stand out here in the second round. This is super flex. I will kind of, for the folks that are listening, I'm a big believer. So Kendall, you talked to kind of about how you like the hero RB. I'm generally a big believer in super flex of a hero QB. I love the value of early wide receivers in that first round. For me, if there's a Jefferson, Chase, Lamb in the first round, that's generally where I'm going, and then I'm going to still try to grab the best quarterback I can in the second round. Um, I just Trevor Lawrence and Jaden Daniels to me should obviously be going in the later rounds. Jaden Daniels is a rookie. I like him as a prospect. I like the upside. I actually like him a lot as a player. I'm actually trying to grab as much Jaden Daniels as I can. I don't like him in the second round. And to me, that's why he kind of stands out as a misprice. Trevor Lawrence, to me, I think the Jaguars are trending down as a team. I thought they had a golden opportunity to win the division last year, and obviously Houston came not necessarily out of nowhere, but Houston certainly wasn't expected to do what they did, and I think everyone is expecting Houston to repeat this season as division champions there of the AFC South. I certainly have it that way. I don't know that the Jaguars got better this offseason. Travis Etienne, you love him. He's great. They're talking about reducing his workload with Tank. I don't know if I believe that or not. I think Tank's not not as good as maybe everyone wants him to be, but the loss of Calvin Ridley and the replacement of Calvin Ridley with Gabe Davis doesn't inspire me. Christian Kirk coming off of kind of a down and an injured season. I like Brian Thomas Jr., but he is a rookie. So to me, Trevor Lawrence, again, I just kind of feel like the Jaguars are trending a little bit down right now, especially in that division. I actually have the Jaguars third in that division. I have Houston first and the Colts second with the Jaguars third. Um, I wouldn't take him at the 210. I'll be honest, I'd feel much more comfortable taking Trevor Lawrence in like the fourth or fifth round as my QB2.
I like it. I like it. And I don't see him go in the second very often. So I feel like more recent ADP is going to have Jaden and Trevor down in the third round, most likely. So maybe this is just a little bit early. I know our
Super
recent
flex,
Friday night
man.
mocks.
The quarterbacks just get pushed up the board. Guys get this quarter, these itchy trigger fingers of like, I have to get a second quarterback. Okay, you do. That's true. But like, what are you giving up to get it? And that's always my biggest question. So for folks that are listening or watching the show, like do a couple, you just mentioned, do a couple mocks on your own and look at some of the players in this range that you're giving up in order to get that second quarterback, because I think if my memory's right, Trevor Lawrence was like quarterback 15 or 16 last season. I have to go back and fact check myself, but I just, to me, I'm paying a price that I'm not getting equal value in my return, my ROI. I'd rather have a receiver or even like Jahmyr Gibbs in the third, but like to me, it's a misprice.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
about you? I know we talked about mine, but where do you see maybe a player that isn't your favorite value here in the second round?
So mine is going to be, it's unfortunate because I love this player. He's one of the guys. He was like one of my first jerseys I ever bought. Always going to be a huge fan. Christian McCaffrey, I think is an awful pick in the entire second round of dynasty startups. It's not because I don't love him. This is still my take after the 2-year extension. My big challenge is I'm playing dynasty in a larger window. I hate drafting win now type of players when it's my second pick and I don't know what the rest of the league is going to look like. I don't know what the rest of my team is going to look like. It can force you into this weird box of, if I'm taking McCaffrey anywhere in the second, I feel like I either have to win the league or I have to trade him for good value. Otherwise, I just lose going into next year by a lot. It's a highly depreciating asset compared to the guys around him. I just think it doesn't make sense. When I even if I look ahead into like some of the third round players and how good they'll be for how long, you look at Wilson, Purdy, Gibbs, Neighbors, even Olave in there. All of those guys are going to be good for 5+ years, like great, potentially league winning in some cases. And McCaffrey, you can't honestly tell me after next year how he's going to be because we haven't seen him this year. He should be elite as ever, but you don't know. And also, there's some pretty good statistics out there that'll say like he was extremely efficient. But if that team has its way, they want to win a Super Bowl, and I think they're very comfortable putting McCaffrey on the field as least as humanly possible. He'll still probably break fantasy even with like 10 touches. He'll do something stupid with it, but. So again, don't hear what I'm not saying is an expression I use a lot. I love Christian McCaffrey, and I don't even think he's a bad dynasty pick. I still think the value he is to a win now roster, or if you want to sell some future assets to go for it, he is the most clear definition of a league winner that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But he's just his second is just way too steep for a format where, I mean, you could really set your dynasty team back by 5 years if you don't win the title with CMC in the second, based on what you could be getting and how many trades and drafting it's going to take to kind of make that value up. So I think it's too much of a risk for me. I don't even like him in the third round. That's why I think he's so mispriced in the second. I think
Wow.
fourth round
Wow.
makes a little more sense, but
Okay.
well, I know. That's it's high. Tyreek Hill is just as league winning and game breaking as CMC at a position that has a longer runway. You know, if you really want to take the league winner, take Tyreek at 3.7 versus CMC at 2.2, which maybe we'll get to that in a little
I
bit
was
here.
gonna say, so ironically, as we move to the third round here, my favorite player in the third round is Tyreek Hill for exactly what you just said, right? Like, I think there is the obvious, I won't say panic, but the obvious end in sight where you say, okay, he's got 2 more years, and then he says he's going to call it a career. Even if he doesn't, he'll be 32 years old. So I think Keenan Allen just turned 32. Keenan Allen is not Tyreek, but I think a lot of people would say this is probably Keenan Allen's swan song. This is potentially, it's for sure his last contract, but potentially his last year in the league. And if it's not, it's just not going to be great for him. But Tyreek Hill at 30 years old can still break fantasy. He was the overall wide receiver 2 last year behind CD Lamb. He's going. I just did a redraft ADP price check myself for a show that I have coming up tomorrow night. Tyreek Hill went as the 102 in that draft. So I know this is a dynasty show, but at the end of the day, Tyreek Hill can win you a week. In the third round, if I were to start my draft with CD Lamb, a quarterback, and then Tyreek Hill, I'm very excited about my roster with those 2 wide receivers and a quarterback of my choosing, in the second round there. Um, to see him go at the 307 behind a Malik Neighbors, behind a Garrett Wilson. I play Dynasty in a 2 to 3 year window. I think Garrett Wilson should have longevity for the next 5 to 7 years. I expect him to get a contract. My question about Garrett Wilson is who the quarterback is going to be. Aaron Rodgers is there this season, possibly next. My questions about Malik Neighbors, although we expect him to see a ton of targets, is who's the quarterback going to be? Because none of us really believe long term is Daniel Jones. So, to me, I would take Tyreek over AJ Brown. I would take him over Puka. And I know that maybe is spicy for some folks because they'll say, well, AJ Brown's younger. He has the contract. He's tied to Jalen Hurts. I think it's semantics and splitting some hairs there. But if Matthew Stafford retires and the Rams don't have a quality quarterback or they have a developmental quarterback, what does that do to Puka's value? To me, Tyreek Hill should be just out of that. If I were to say that the top 4 guys in my mind are going to be Lamb, Chase, Jefferson, and Amon-Ra, I think it's a good conversation of who's the wide receiver 5 in Dynasty, AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, and then potentially some of these other names you see on the board with Puka and Marvin Harrison. But we've seen consistent production in Kansas City from Tyreek Hill. We've seen consistent production in Miami. So to me, Tyreek Hill at the 307 just stands out as a great value.
Couldn't disagree. I totally forgot I was accidentally teeing you up for that one.
No, it was on purpose, my man.
Hey man, sometimes it works out good that way. But yeah, man, Tyreek Hill, man, did he led me to a lot of redraft titles. Appreciate you, Tyreek. You think Tyreek's the type of guy where, like, when he retires, he still probably wins a Super Bowl ring because whoever's in the championship says, "Hey, Tyreek, you want to run it back?" And he's like, "Yeah, dude, I'll get off the couch." Like,
Yeah, he'll play for the
that could
Raiders
happen.
with Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski.
Yeah,
That'll be the 2026 Super Bowl with the Raiders there. So
yeah, I'm telling you, like, you know how OBJ is kind of doing he's not retired, so can't call it a comeback, but I mean, I haven't seen him play since a long
I
time.
think they call it a farewell tour.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's like
think,
like a big band, like when they had their kind of their their farewell tours. You knew they were about to hang it up. That's what OBJ is doing.
yeah, Tyreek, he might even do it like crazier than Brady, though. I think he might like fully hang it up for an entire year. You won't see him that postseason, but like the next postseason, he'll be like, shoot, all right, like,
I miss
I'll play.
football. Yeah.
Watch him be still the best player in the NFL at 34, fully Michael Jordan, been away for a year,
What
and
Travis
just,
Kelsey say? Till the wheels fall off, baby.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, when the wheels are 1,000 horsepower engine, yeah, I'm about it. So I
So who
like it.
stands out for you in the third here?
Uh There's a lot to me. I love the third round. If I just trade for like a lot of the third round, I feel like there's a lot of screaming. Well, maybe not. There's a couple values here. Maybe not screaming value. Fourth round probably gets spicy for me. I think the values get better and better as the rounds continue to go. So I have like 3 honorable mentions, but I can only pick one. So I'm gonna pick 2. Screw it. It's my show. I'm gonna do what I want. I'm gonna go Purdy though. I think Purdy because he's probably less of a pure value, but in terms of where I think he will go in future startups from a value perspective. And if I were to give him comps that like went in this ADP, I don't think Purdy and Jordan Love are like tremendously different players when you look at them. Purdy has good weapons. Jordan Love has good weapons.
Yeah,
Purdy
fair.
showed a lot of poise in a pressure-filled situation. Jordan Love had a lot of pressure on him, knowing that the weapons around him were good, and they were expected to win a lot of games, and he had to make that happen. And I think Purdy showed a lot more poise in some playoff situations this year that I would have expected. I've seen many good quarterbacks do way worse than Purdy did.
Sure.
So, I mean, I don't think you can. Coaches are big on people that just win. Purdy has a ridiculous winning record with a good attitude. He's a good locker room guy. I mean, the whole team's behind him. I think it's an unstoppable force. The second he has that like full year where everyone's like, oh, remember when we used to call him that guy who kind of has the job for now? And then he transitions to, no, Purdy's just the starting quarterback of the 49ers. Just like we know that like Joe Burrow is the Bengals, right? Joe Burrow is the quarterback for the Bengals. It's unquestionable.
Yep.
Right. It's just kind of the thing, right? Herbert in the Chargers. That's a package deal. Purdy hasn't felt like a 49er yet, but he is. That's why I think he's a screaming value. I think the only reason he's still on the board at 3-2 is because people still have that lingering, like, am I really taking the last pick of the NFL draft? The guy we all picked up off of waivers in the 3-2. Is that happening? Am I going to be a joke when Purdy kind of like comes back down to earth?
You've seen 2 full seasons now. He finished, I think, as the QB. Jordan Love was QB5. I think Purdy was QB10. You love Kyle Shanahan's offense. I think I would say to those folks who have those fears, get over it. To be blunt, I think you've got to trust what your eyes see, and what my eyes see is that Brock Purdy has a large enough sample size now to justify being the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah. And also my low-key stat. I'm going to need to get better at pulling the stats on the screen for a future production value. Keep watching the show. It's going to get better. Purdy actually threw down the field a lot. He had I forget exactly what metric I was looking at, but I know it got covered in another show where like he sneakily threw the ball downfield quite a bit. I mean, Ayuk had a lot of long catches.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And I'm not talking, these are air yards, not yards after the catch. No yak nonsense. This
Right.
is just, he was very comfortable with, he has good pocket awareness, enough, shimmy to buy himself a second, and he'd let it rip. And I think a lot of people look at him as a game manager type of player. When he can be, when you're that good of a team, anybody can be a game manager. But when the game is close, I think the dude can let it fly. So I like it. My honorable mention, though, is a guy I think that goes in the second. Jahmyr Gibbs, I have to shout out. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is right with Bijan and Brees. He's right neck and there with him. He's neck and neck with him at a 60% snap share. So he still has room to get better, which is unfathomable in an offense that's bulletproof for a long time. But the reason I like your Bijan take so much is with the way I've been drafting, I think it's worth mentioning. I really am liking in Dynasty startups a hero RB approach, but it's for a different reason though. It's because when I look at about 50 running backs that are draftable, there's more, right? I like drafting like 5 or 6 running backs in the entire pool of running backs you can draft in the NFL. I maybe get excited about 6 of them.
Yep.
And I want to vomit at every other pick. And I've done enough mocks to kind of figure out that I do think I have, every time I look at Bijan, Brees, and Gibbs, where they go in drafts, they're never my top ranked player or my second top ranked player. I always have a lot of guys ahead of them. But I find that if I really analyze my mocks and I look at the 4th through the 7th, sometimes 8 rounds, the freedom I have to just take best available on my board, draft from a pure value standpoint, take whoever I want to, whenever I want to, because I don't have to worry about it. I don't have any temptation to reach. I can just end up taking 2 or 3 more guys that I like when I like them, and I don't have to worry about when do I have to. And I'm such a big believer in the 24 wide receiver class that there are picks that I like all the way through round 20. So there's never a time where I want to take a running back over what could be with these rookies. So that's why if it's close, I would love to grab one of those top 3 backs. I think there's a big gap. I mean, there's like a 2 to 3 year age gap after them, and they're younger and better than everyone else. It's this wonderful slam dunk. Gibbs in the third's fantastic.
Yeah.
How about
Yeah,
you, my
agreed.
man?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just finish with this to kind of piggyback your Gibbs point. To me, what I'm looking for when I evaluate running backs, holistically, under 25 years of age, what's your snap share going to be? Are you on a high scoring offense? And so to me, we're not going to talk about these players tonight, but like a Jalen Warren kind of stands out to me as a guy who they didn't pick up Najee's 5th-year option. I think Jalen Warren is the better running back in Pittsburgh. He's young. He's going to be 24 years old at the end of the day. I think that's what I'm looking for is, can he break fantasy? No. Is he going to be an RB1? No. But would I love to see Jahmyr Gibbs with a mid-round running back, or a Trey Benson is what I'd love to see in my room, is Jahmyr Gibbs with a mid-round Trey Benson and a Jalen Warren, knowing that I'll have Benson to develop into my future RB2 and kind of get through the season with, Jalen Warren and whoever else I could pick up in the late round to kind of fill in my, weekly plug and play RB2 based off of matchup, knowing that Gibbs is in that RB1 spot. So I like youth. We all want to get younger, but there are players in the NFL and positions in the NFL where having Devontae Adams and Mike Evans on your dynasty team isn't sexy and it's not going to last very long, but they're going to have a good season. And I don't want, a super old, I don't necessarily want 28-year-old, 2 ACL injuries, Nick Chubb on a ton of my rosters, even though he had the name once. I'd rather have the older wide receiver if I need to win and have the youth in my running back room, because running backs, as we know, the way the NFL values them now, the older you are, the less value that you have right now. And that's where the money says, and that's also how teams are drafting. I'll kind of finish us up here in the 3rd round with my least favorite. It should be pretty obvious, but
It is very obvious. It's very obvious, right? I'm not even sure why he's here at ADP. I think we're thinking the same guy.
I can't understand Deshaun Watson's value in the 3rd round. I'll be honest. One, from a moral standpoint, Deshaun Watson's not on my teams. Forget the morality piece of it. From a football standpoint, Deshaun Watson has not produced what his contract has been paid in Cleveland. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. I don't believe that contract. I think other than the Russell Wilson contract, Deshaun Watson's trade from Houston to Cleveland and that contract could be the worst contract in the history of the NFL. I just don't.
Something.
To me, last year, I'll go back to 2 years ago. Deshaun Watson looked like a player that hadn't played football in 18 months. That was very obvious. But he also looked like a guy that didn't want to play football. Like, he didn't look like he was getting better. And if you forget the games, if you go like we do as the real degens we are, if you go and look at some of the stuff in practice and you read the practice reports and you look at some of the stuff in the interviews, he just didn't seem like he wanted to be there. It seemed like a guy that said, I've got a lot of problems off the field. I just got a monster contract that's probably going to solve a lot of these problems. Where do I sign? And I didn't see last year a player that had another year of football under his belt, that had camp reps, a full offseason program to prepare. So, number one, don't take Deshaun Watson in the 3rd round if you're going to draft him as your second quarterback in a super flex. Please don't do that. Number two, I watched Joe Flacco outperform him. David Njoku's, we know tight ends can play for a long time, but David Njoku's 27. Jerry Jeudy's 25. I'm not a big Jerry Jeudy truther. Amari Cooper, I believe, is 30 years old. Nick Chubb, we just mentioned, is 27, 28, coming off 2 catastrophic knee injuries. I'm just not a big believer that Cleveland is going to be a great offense. I don't want a quarterback on a mediocre offense in a division that I don't think they can win. I think the Ravens and the Bengals will be the top 2 teams. And I just mentioned Jalen Warren. Mike Tomlin is one of my favorite, if not my favorite coach in the league. The guy finds ways to get it done every year on teams that, not arguably, they do not have on paper the talent that some of these other teams have around them in the NFL. And the guy finds ways to win. So I think Cleveland finishes 4th in that division again. And like I said, Deshaun Watson in the 3rd. Again, I think it's a misprice for ADP. I'll be honest, I wouldn't take him, but if I had to, I think I'd probably feel comfortable in like the 7th or 8th round taking Deshaun Watson. I'd rather load up on wide receivers, get a star quarterback. load up on wide receivers and running backs, and then say, okay, I'll kind of piece my super flex QB2 together. And Watson's pretty low in my rankings and pretty low on my list.
Dude, I think I might take Bo Nix over Deshaun Watson.
I would take Bo Nix over Deshaun Watson. No, I would. I would take. It's not even funny. Like I would 100% do that.
You ever watch the have you ever seen the Ship Chasers? If you're watching, by the way, very, very cool channel. If you like Underdog Best Ball. Again, I'm not sponsored by literally anybody, I'm not yet. We'll get there. But so this is just pure shout outs. I'm just a super fan. I love everything fantasy football and I watch every bit of content. So if you want to if you need someone new to watch, just message us in the comments. We have a bunch of shows that are quite good for various things. The Ship Chasers are of the ilk of Best Ball Bros, right? They're quite good. They're pretty good. I like what they do. They've got some people that have won. I think they've won Best Ball Mania before. Come on, they're quite often. But they were doing a mock draft early in the season. I think one of their first, maybe it was Best Ball Mania, maybe it was a Bulldog or something like that. But they were debating taking Deshaun Watson. I honestly don't remember if they auto picked into him or had to pick him to get a stack or something like that. But they all quickly did all right, I feel gross. And they all basically one after another started telling really wholesome stories about their daughters and daddy daughter dance. And they're I think everyone should do this as an exercise, right? You know, if you have to take him, you should say something really good about your daughter and your friend's daughters. Just take totally. A few minutes. I'm it's like the ringtone at this point. It's when you're thinking about it, just look at your kids, man.
You need an actual shower, and then you need a soul shower, like a morality shower to clean yourself up there a little bit. So there you go. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. Wrap us up, man. Who is someone that in the third round here is either mispriced or someone that you're saying, I'd feel more comfortable getting him a little bit later.
Sure. It's Laporta for me. I like Laporta. I like Detroit. I do think Laporta probably is the dynasty wide receiver one. That feels gross to say because I think it's so close. There's just a tier at the top for me.
Yeah.
But the third is just too early.
Yeah.
One, here, I'll just break it down real quick. I think Laporta has the shakiest case for being the tight end one or the overall best at his position that I've seen. It's usually pretty clear cut. You almost always clear cut at wide receiver. If it's not, it's one or two. It's very close. Laporta did score the most. But when you look at situation going into next season, one for he was a league winner because he got drafted so late, but he was not putting up the numbers that a Travis Kelce would in his heyday. He wasn't that level of Travis Kelce is basically a top 3 wide receiver. Andrews is a top 5 wide receiver. Laporta is not that. And he also had 10 touchdowns. I think that comes way down to the mean. He had one game with 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
That might not happen. It would not surprise me if he had 6 touchdowns next season. And this was a hyper condensed offense where I think the running backs probably can't score any more touchdowns because my goodness, did they score a lot? But they could spread the ball around a little bit more. I think Amon-Ra didn't have as many touchdowns as he probably could have. I think J-Mo is definitely...
Yeah, Jameson Williams, yeah.
I mean, he's going to get involved to some extent. So I think Laporte is great. I want to say that. But I think he's mispriced by a full round. I don't think there's some elite separation between, do I just take the number one? McBride's going to be great on a much improved offense. And I think he clearly showed that he was averaging almost 10 targets a game to finish off the season with nobody coming in. He's an NFL veteran at this point. He's young, but he's actually been in the NFL a little bit. He's going to be fantastic. Yeah, I think Dalton Kincaid has one of the easiest paths to a major role in his offense. Laporta is never going to be the wide receiver one for his team in terms of target. Amon-Ra is just too good.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
When you look at Kincaid, and neither is McBride. Kincaid could be the number one target for Buffalo, just the number one overall offensive weapon. Kincaid could have 12 touchdowns next season, actual go full Kelce. So I can get Kincaid in the early 5th. I don't know why we're going too up to grab Laporta.
Yeah.
But mispriced.
I was to say, I love what you said because, if you look at the ADP here, you can see Laporta would be technically wide receiver 10 off the board. He was tight end 1 last year. I ran the numbers. He actually finished statistically as wide receiver 15. He would have, were he a wide receiver, that's where he would have finished. I get the hype. The hype is the Lions had a great run to the NFC Championship game. They're bringing everybody back. They're trending up. We love the ability to score points. You've got a young tight end. You've got a guy who finished tight end one in his rookie season. There's nothing bad to say about him. I get it. I love what you just said about Dalton Kincaid potentially a round or two later. I love Keon Coleman. I think he's going to be good, but he's still a rookie. I think you and I have talked about this a lot. I think James Cook and Dalton Kincaid were the big winners in the Stephon Diggs trade away. I think they are going to see and inherit a lot of that market share. And I think you're right. Getting a player in a offense that we like, just like we like Detroit in the 4th or 5th round, when you could easily grab, and I talked about him as my favorite, a Tyreek Hill, another quarterback here. You see Brandon Ayuk on the board. We know there's some names that, Devonta Smith is not on this board. There's some other guys that Drake London is not on this board. There's some guys that we know are going to go. Jalen Waddle's not on this board. So there's some guys that are going to go in this 4th round here that we'll talk about, on a future show.
This guy should be in the 3rd round. That's
my point. I think those are guys when I'm on now, my personal draft strategy is almost always to punt the tight end position because of the statistical variance. If you're telling me that the number one tight end, the number one player at his position is still the 15th best wide receiver, no matter your league format, that's still a wide receiver 2. Dalton Kincaid, exactly. Dalton Kincaid could easily be the number one tight end. Trey McBride could be the number one tight end. Andrews or Kelsey, we know they are capable of that. So if Kyle Pitts takes the leap, there's multiple guys in that range that could finish as the tight end 1. You mentioned Jameson Williams. You mentioned potentially some touchdown regression. Give me Drake London, Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman, Devonta Smith, that kind of core of wide receiver in the 3rd round is my wide receiver 2. And I'll go ahead and figure out who's going to be my tight end 1 in a later round.
Or it's like for me, like straight up when I look at points, like Laporta in the 3rd or McBride in the 4th. Okay.
Yep.
Laporta in the 3rd or Kincaid. And let's just say 4-5 turn. That would be like, you want your guy, go get him. Rather have him there. Him over Brock Bowers in the 6th. I kind of like Brock Bowers in the 6th over Laporta in the 5th.
Yeah.
Maybe he won't finish with 10 touchdowns ever, but he's going to be a good weapon.
But Brock Bowers, go ahead.
Hawkinson in the 8th. Still liking the value. Ferguson in the 9th. Still liking the value. Pat Freiermuth in the 10th. I can name a tight end in every round that I like as a better value than Laporta. I'm not saying they're better than Laporta, but we are passing on some pretty influential people. Yeah. When you combine, it's not a great pick overall because is he really the one? And there's better picks later on, and there's amazing players that are still in the 4th that you could take now. It's a combination of he's just overpriced. He should be going a full round later at like the 4-8.
Well, and I think, look, and the tight end position, it is positional scarcity, right? I think what people have to remember is that Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews in their heyday, when they were finishing with 200 plus PPR points in the top 3, what would have been a wide receiver type, 3 performance for that season, they were the de facto wide receiver 1s for their team, right? You mentioned Trey McBride. Trey McBride is the quote unquote wide receiver 2 for his team as a tight end behind Marvin Harrison Jr. Jahmyr Gibbs, to me, is probably the wide receiver 2 for Detroit after Amon-Ra, and now we expect Jameson Williams to take that leap. So I love Laporta. If I can have him on my team, of course I'm going to draft him. But again, this is the whole point of this conversation. At what cost and at what price? Because to me, overpaying for somebody who, and this is the key point I want to make, overpaying for someone who has to finish as the tight end 1 to return on that value, to me, that's the gamble that I'm not willing to take, and that's the price I'm not willing to pay. Whereas if I take some of those wide receivers I mentioned earlier, those guys are probably going to finish as wide receiver 2s. They have wide receiver 1 ceilings. Jalen Waddle, we know what he's capable of. Devonta Smith, both of them have been supported as a top 12 wide receiver by their quarterbacks, while Tyreek and A.J. Brown were also wide receiver 1s. We've seen that. So to me, that's where I say, look, the cost doesn't justify what the return on my draft capital is going to be.
I like it. So that was the first 3 rounds based on Dynasty League Football's ADP for Superflex Dynasty startups. Again, check out the guys over at Dynasty League Fantasy. We're not sponsored, but I had to get ADP from somewhere, and I pay them money, so they give me cool content. I like them. check him out. Good place to do that. We'll go ahead and wrap up here a little bit. Thanks for hanging out with us. Check the other videos. I'll turn it into a playlist. Maybe Phil will be back. Maybe some of the other Get Right Fantasy Network crew will pop in as well. But for me, obviously, keep checking out videos here at the tavern. We're going to be doing a lot more mock drafting coming up. So message me if you want to get into a mock draft. We're going to do some live underdog best ball drafts as well. And probably coming out with a lot of buy low, sell high, hot predictions, that type of thing. Basically, anytime I can record a video, I do. So hopefully we can get some more free time here. Definitely check out the guys over at Get Right Fantasy Network. We have a sleeper channel. I'll pop in the description. Always doing mock drafts. Really, really nice community. Great place to find and jump in a league. Phil is running leagues all the time, so definitely message him if you're looking to get into a dynasty league. He's the commissioner of like half the leagues I'm in. He has seemingly no social life of any kind because he spends all his time running our leagues. Appreciate that about you, man. Taking one for the team over there. But yeah, come check us out. If you haven't subscribed, what do I got to do to buy a subscription? I would love to have you a subscriber. I would be honored. You that is listening right now, I would love to have it. So drop me a message if you're on the fence about subscribing. What do I got to make a video on to get some more subscriptions? I want to keep this content creator thing going. It's a fun journey. I'm having more and more fun day by day as I meet people in the space and just super fans like myself. So appreciate the support from those guys who have been watching and checking us out. Really appreciate you. Phil, tell the people where to find you and what you have going on.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, man. I always love the invite and getting time to spend talking football with you. We could do it for hours and hours and hours. You can find me at The Extra Point. I am on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram at _extra_point_FFB. I am also on Spotify at The Extra Point, and I am also on Patreon at The Extra Point. I do a live show on YouTube Thursday nights, 7 p.m. Pacific. Sometimes it's a solo cast. Sometimes I'll have guests on. But we are talking all things Dynasty. So if Dynasty is your jam and you're looking for content, check out The Extra Point.
Love it. It's been real. Phil, we're going to have to crack a beer, do this again real soon.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for stopping into the tavern. Y'all have a good night. Cheers.